for the annual conference or for the general conference is to glorify God by living a holy life. And, I've heard different responses to the message, and it's a good message that Brother Rick gives and calls upon us to live a holy life, to live with the Holy Spirit in us, and follow the Holy Spirit and go forward. And so, you've been able to find? Okay, you just get in there. Okay. And and I think it's the first two slides that need to be okay. But anyways, and so one person got up after he had given that sermon and said, boy, he said everything about holiness there's to say. And my thought was, what? There's so much to say about it. And we, especially as Westerners, have a lot of difficulties understanding it. Now, I've cut out the difficulties portion of it in the PowerPoint, just because I knew I'd gone a little long. So it may not be as good because I've cut out about half of it. But, holiness, think about it. What's the basic idea that when we talk about holiness? It is what? What's the next word usually given? Separate. Being separated, being different. And so we often think upon this concept of holiness as being separated, and the Nazarenes have a great, they seem to be leading it, but they have it actually a better statement because they have it, you're being holy unto the Lord. It's more important that it's not so much as being separated from something, but being separated to something. Okay? And there are many passages and okay, go on to the first slide. Let's see if it's the right one. Okay, here are main ones. And by the way, when we look at the various passages, the word holiness shows up in many different forms throughout the Bible. In fact, there's a whole host of vocabulary that sits around the word holiness. One of them is sanctified. If you turn to Genesis chapter 2, verse 3, you'll see there one of the first occurrences of the concept of the word holiness, even though in many translations the word holy is not there for you. But if you turn to Genesis, if you get to Genesis chapter 2, verse 3, you find this is where God separates, blesses the Sabbath day and sanctifies it or makes it holy, because that is the day that he ceased from his work. And the way the ancients remembered that, honored that, was by ceasing from working on Sabbath, or in our case, from ceasing to work on the resurrection day of Sunday. We recognize that Jesus' work is finished, and therefore we also cease from work there. So that's the first thing that we see in it. The next thing that we discover when we look at this, you go to Exodus chapter 3, verse 5. This is the scene where Moses is approaching the burning bush, and he's got a scientific inquiry here. He's seen a bush that's burning up. Now, according to his observations in the past and experience in the past, when a bush catches fire, the fire consumes the bush. And that's what he's expecting to see, but he's noticing that this bush is not being consumed. So that gets his scientific inquiry going. So he approaches it, and once he approaches it, God sees him approaching there in Exodus chapter 3, verse 5. And God looks at him and says to Moses, and I'll say it correctly this time, take your shoes off. I said something different. But I will say, for this is holy ground. So with these two verses, we find out that God is the one who makes someone holy or something holy. He is the ultimate one who designates something as holy, and it's a blessing. The second thing that we discover is that the very presence of God causes a place to be holy, a location to be holy. And Moses had to symbolically take his shoes off. And if you understand the symbolism thereof, you quickly realize that what's being talked about, what are shoes usually made of? Now, nowadays it's not so true, but used to be all shoes were made of what? Hide. And in order to get some hide, you just go out and cut it off the bull and bring it in and work it? No, you had to kill the bull. So shoes represented death. Now you'll see that the priest, if you go into the Old Testament law, the priests and the Levites, when they were serving, had to take their shoes off. They should serve God in the temple barefooted. You probably don't want me to preach up here barefooted. Our culture has changed a little bit. But basically what that was is the shoes were a representation of death, and God is a God of life. And so symbolically the shoes had to be removed. It's not necessarily like in the Philippines, every house that I went to, you always took your shoes off before you entered the house. And that was a matter of cleanliness. It's kind of the same idea, but ultimately it's the concept of life and death being there. Then we come to Leviticus chapter 2, verses chapter 2, verse 3, and this is the portion that we preachers like. You'll find out that the offering, now we know the offering, by virtue of being an offering, is holy, okay? Because it's being set aside as an offering to the Lord. And in this passage, God says about the offering that the portion which is given to the priest is most holy. Now, we preachers like that because that tells us that our paycheck is most holy before God, okay? And basically, this is the portion of the meat that was given to the priest as his pay. And so the part that was being given to the priest to be paid was holy. There's a lot of people, I can take a whole sermon on that, but we don't have that problem in this church. But there are people out there who they don't want to pay the preacher, they don't want to support the preacher, and they don't realize that they're defiling God's ways, that God expects his people to be taken care of. But we don't have that problem here, okay? But anyways, so the thing I want you to understand here is that holiness is not a static concept. There's degrees of holiness. Then we come to Leviticus chapter 10, verse 11, and we find that the priests and the Levites were to teach the concepts of holiness to the people. And in actuality, one of my primary responsibilities as a pastor is to teach you so that you know how to live a holy life. You recognize what's holy, what's not holy, and understand how to navigate the issues of holiness. Unfortunately, in our culture, we no longer understand it, and most preachers don't preach about it. Most people don't even. We've reduced holiness. And I'm not going into the concept of how our culture has diminished holiness, but in a sense, we've reduced holiness to an insult. Oh, you're holier than me. You're holier than that. We use it as an insult. Okay? When in actuality, it's a very important concept. Next one. Now, then that's actually chapter 11. I thought I changed that, I corrected that. But anyways, chapter 11, verses 44 through verses 45. And here you have God telling that he expects his people, if you are his people, to live a holy life. And he gives instructions of that. And this is expressed symbolically. Now, you notice I've been using the word symbolically a lot. Because it's very interesting. There's so many facets of holiness, but then there's also some symbolic elements. Now, I've actually taught you about symbolic holiness in this congregation. But the priests, one of the things the priests weren't supposed to do was to drink alcohol. Especially when they were serving in the temple. It was forbidden. It was forbidden. And so you see that in chapter 10, verse 9. You also see the whole, a lot of people, one thing that we just don't appreciate is the whole concepts of the dietary laws were about holiness, okay? And we're symbolically expressing holiness. It wasn't about health. I know in the last generation, they always talked about that the Jewish diet is more healthy than the American diet. It's just as healthy or unhealthy. It's like any other culture. But it's symbolically, everything represented, somehow represented back to the fall of creation. Like, for example, you didn't eat catfish because it was a bottom feeder. And by the way, what we call, scavenger fish, but there's another fish that's very common, that's very cheap, that the Jews eat, but it doesn't eat the bottom of the ground. I forget what it's called. But the Jews, it's a type of might be carp, yeah. Something along that line. But it's not a scavenger, okay? So it's okay to eat, but catfish you can't. And the reason for the catfish eats what? It eats dead material, garbage down at the bottom. Eagles and vultures were forbidden. Not because the vulture is an ugly looking animal. What do vultures eat? Dead things, right. And so you had all these things, and they were symbolic. And we know that was not the essence of it, because Jesus in Matthew 15, verses 16 through 17, talks about what really defiles us is not what we put into our mouth and digest. That doesn't defile us. What comes out of the heart and comes out of the mouth is what really defiles us. But the food is a symbolic way. And it is sometimes symbols are very important, because you see in Daniel chapter 1, he has been stripped of his identity as an Israelite, as a Jew. Actually, this time he's still being a Judite. As a Judite, he's been stripped of his identity as a worshiper of Yahweh. He's been given a name of a pagan god. His whole identity has been stripped from him, and he's been given a new identity. And the only thing that he has control over by which to express his devotion to God is the dietary laws. And so he refuses much of the meats and things from the Babylonian court. Now you have to understand that when he did that, he took a pay cut. A dramatic pay cut, because that was part of your pay back then. Remember, this is a pre-money society, so your pay was your food allotments. So he was willing to hold on to his identity and hold on to it in the one area that he was still able to negotiate to keep his identity as a worshiper of God, and as a result, take a dramatic pay cut. He went from filet mignon to Brussels sprouts. Think about that. He went from a filet mignon pay scale to Brussels sprouts. And so we see these basic concepts of holiness. Now, at the conference, I gave a bunch of pictures, which y'all probably enjoy, to help show them. You see, I think I took them all out. Just the one? Go ahead and go to the next one. Oh, I haven't taken out any. Okay. Hindrance. Let's skip all that. Next one. Okay. Back up. This picture, everybody's seen this picture? Does everybody know what that picture's about? There was actually somebody who didn't know what that picture was about at annual conference. Well, not everybody lives on social media, okay? Okay. Well, actually, here, there's two things I want you to see here in this picture. And if you go see it, on the one hand, see, now another part about holiness that we don't like as Westerners is part of the honor-shame culture, okay? And we Americans don't like to be shamed. That's the worst thing you can do to somebody in our culture is shame them. Okay? All right? That's about the worst thing you can do to somebody. Now, this couple were at a Coldplay concert, and they had a kiss cam, you know, where they focus in on a couple, and you're supposed to kiss, okay? The only problem was, in this case, he was the executive of a major corporation, and she was the HR executive of that major corporation, and they weren't married, and they weren't married to each other, and he was married to another woman. Okay? Huh? Oh, she's too? Okay. So they're, and you see, and then they saw themselves on the kiss cam. And all of a sudden, they were hit with shame because they were caught in the act of violating the status of holy matrimony. She literally ducks down behind the seats. She puts her hands on her face and turns around. Okay? See, because at that moment they were hit with the shame of what they were doing. Now, right when they first, you can see they were enjoying themselves. But once they realized publicly that they had just been hit, that they'd been exposed publicly, and that tells you something else about holiness. Holiness is a communal concept that affects our relationship to the community. And so when they hit them and they went down and hid and all that thing, after that, the young lady who posted this said she probably wouldn't have posted it except their reaction was so dramatic. They were so overwhelmed by shame that she turns and he ducks, that's why she put it up there. And from that, the world has made all sorts of imitations of it and has made fun of it for at least a week or two. I think maybe a week. How long has it been? It's been a while. And just making fun of it. Even the Philly Fanatic got involved in it. Okay, they had a mockery of it. All right? And the thing that I want to point out here, the mockery forgets about the original, is making fun of their response of shame. Had they not responded in shame, they probably would never have been posted. You catch that? And so our culture just makes light of it, even though at the core there is something very, very serious, a travesty. Okay? Not a tragedy, it's travesty, because people's actions are involved. So that's kind of a basic hindrance that we have, and I've gone through some others, but next. The thing that we have to understand to appreciate holiness, the thing that we need to do to understand about holiness, and I may stop here, is that in the Old Testament, you had to, the various levels of and types of holiness were all expressed through various types of symbolic acts. And you had the levels, you had the Holy of Holies, you had the holy place, you had the sanctuary, you had the congregation of Israel, and then you had those outside of the congregation. And if you went from one level to another level, you had to go through a series of rituals. If we were part of back, and we kind of used to do that in our culture. Remember, there was a time that when we got ready to go to church, we put on our Sunday best. What we were doing was getting ready to enter into the presence of the holy God. And so you have all these symbolic acts that we go through, and the ancient Israelites would have to go through washings before they went to the tabernacle. And the priest had to go through washings before he entered into the tabernacle building itself and served. And then when they left those areas, they had to take off their priestly garments and put them aside and wash and put on city clothes, and then they could go out. And you went back and forth along these lines. Now, but the whole purpose of the Old Testament holiness system or sanctification system was that it was created a special place where a holy God and a common creature could meet without the holy God destroying the common creature. So we have to understand that the only thing that is truly holy, the only entity that is truly holy is God. There is, and the reason holiness is not directly attached to righteousness. God is wholly other. He's not part of this universe. He's completely distinct from us. His thoughts are above our thoughts. His ways are beyond our ways. He is not like mortal man that he has to lie to cover up things. He's completely open. There's no one who can give him counsel because he knows all things and understands all things. He's the creator of all things. He wrote the manual and he runs the ship. He is from all eternity past, he's in eternity future, and he's always in the present. He is not like us. And because he's wholly other, we could spell that with a W. Wholly other, he is the only one who is truly holy, completely separate from this cosmos, this universe. Next. Next. Okay. Next. Okay, I did put some pictures here. Okay. Next. Okay, I don't have. I'm a little out of sync here. Spheres of holiness. Go ahead and next one. Next. I don't have any of them out. I wonder why they're not blocked. Okay, next. Here we go. That's the slide I want. We are holy the moment we receive the Holy Spirit. Notice what we're called. Our bodies are the temple of God. In the Old Testament, there was a physical building where people went and met with God. In the New Testament, God indwells us. Our very physical body is holy because the Holy Spirit lives in us. And if we don't have the Holy Spirit, then we're not actually holy. Because the holiness of God then is transferred to us as a person. And for time's sake, you'll have to come back next week for the rest of it. So because it's already, if I were to continue, I would be here for another 30 minutes. I could just tell that. But anyways, what you'll have to think upon, what we just touched upon, there's three aspects of holiness. One is positional. Positional is given to us by the Holy Spirit. That is where we are really holy. But there's two other aspects of it at least. One is expressional, and the other symbolic. I've mentioned symbolic multiple times. I have not touched upon the expressional yet. But I'll explain those things next week before communion.